You're listening to the award-winning podcast from Rutgers Law School, The Power of Attorney. I'm your host and Dean of the Law School, Johanna Bond. Today's episode is a powerful reminder that a law degree has reach far beyond a courtroom. We're joined by alumni Sagie Kleinlerer, whose professional journey began here and led him to becoming the founder and winemaker of Kleinlerer Wines. His story raises important questions for our students and alumni alike. How do we listen to our inner voice, and how do our values shape our work? I'm delighted to welcome Sagie to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. You are a first-generation American. Your mother emigrated from Israel. Your father is a Holocaust survivor from Poland. So tell us a little bit about your origin story.
Sure. So I am first-generation American. I was born and raised in New York. My father was born in Poland back in 1923. My mother was born, my parents were 20 years apart, actually. So it was a May-December relationship. But I grew up with an interesting background in that I had the old world Jewish upbringing of the Polish background, the old world of, that part of Judaism. But I also had the modern Jewish side of my mother. So my grandparents emigrated to Israel in the 1920s. But my mother had a different, upbringing because she was born and raised in Israel. And growing up in New York, my parents spoke broken English to each other. My father spoke 7 languages, none of them Hebrew.
Wow.
My mother spoke English and Hebrew, but they both, it's their second language for both of them. So we grew up in a household that didn't have really the American culture. So we kind of all learned it together.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So Thanksgiving in our home, for example, which is a truly American holiday, we had a family meal, but pardon me, battling a cold. It wasn't a formal turkey dinner with the stuffing and the sides. It was really a blend of, Israeli cuisine and Jewish cuisine and just what we enjoyed eating. So we had, roasted chicken, and we had, Mediterranean side dishes. And it was just an interesting blend of cultures in our home. But growing up in New York gives you opportunities that, you don't often have in other areas. So we grew up going to museums and concerts, both classical and rock. We would go out to eat in restaurants. And so there was this old world culture where my parents would take me and my sister to restaurants when we were young. Right. And there was wine in the house, and we had a family dinner every single night. It wasn't just once a week. But we also had Shabbat dinner on Friday nights, where we were not allowed to go out. We were home on Friday nights, no matter what. When our friends in high school would go out and hang out, we had to be home for that formal family dinner. And we would light Shabbat candles, and we would say the Kiddush over the wine and have challah. But with that, we also had some European and Middle Eastern qualities in our home. For example, our parents drank wine regularly, and it wasn't something that was foreign to us, and they allowed us to taste their wine. And when I say tasting, I always jokingly say, when people ask how I got into the wine business, I always say, I had my first sip of wine at 8 days. Now, if you're Jewish, you get that. Thank you. And if you're not, you can look that up. And I've been hooked ever since. But there was wine in the house, and it wasn't foreign. And so we would taste their wines. We wouldn't drink glasses of wine, but we would taste it. So by the time that I got to college, or my sister got to college, we weren't binge drinking because it was part of our culture. It wasn't, this new and exciting thing. It was like, yeah, it's alcohol. Okay.
You grew up with it, right?
You grew up with it.
Right.
So it really is a part of my upbringing and who I am. And that's part of the reason why I ventured into this world today. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's an incredible story. So I have to ask you, how many languages do you speak now? Do you speak any Polish? Is that in the repertoire?
The Polish I do know I can't say on a podcast, but
Fair enough.
But I do speak 3 languages. I'm fluent in English and Hebrew, and I actually like to say 2 3/4, and I get by in French, actually. Okay. So after the war, my father found his sister, and they both moved to France because my aunt was dating and ended up marrying a French Jewish partisan. And so since my father's side of the family was basically they were all gone. They were all exterminated in the Holocaust. They found each other and they moved to France to be with my uncle's family.
Wow.
And so I have family in Paris as well. So I studied French in junior high and high school just so I can communicate with them. And if you want to fast forward a little bit, I ended up marrying a French woman. So,
that
hey, French comes in handy. Yes, it does.
Wow, that's great. That's an incredible story, Sagie.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So you've told us a little bit about where your passion for wine came from. And you mentioned your father's time in France in World War II made a lasting impression on your family when you've spoken about this previously. So can you elaborate on that and tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So my father was 16 when the war broke out. And from the second week of the war, we're talking September 1939, he and my family were sent to the Lodz Ghetto. And he spent, a couple of years in Lodz Ghetto, ended up being transferred out to Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany, where he was forced into labor there. And interestingly enough, and this is not exactly related, but I always like to throw this out there, nothing in life is black and white. And my father was helped by two German soldiers in the forced labor camp that took a liking to my father, and they would sneak him a little bit of extra food that they would wrap in newspaper and put it behind a garbage can. Wow. And he would share that with his friends in the camp. And we're talking about a little bit of food. Mm-hmm. And so after the war, he kept in touch with them for a while. And sadly, he lost touch with them. But he always taught us that hatred is something that it's not worth hating. Now, yes, he hated the Nazis and he hated, that, but there's always good in the world. There's always a little glimmer of light. And so my father emigrated to the US in the 1960s, actually. He went to go work in Texas. There was a program that sent him, he got his engineering degree in Paris after the war and ended up in Texas in the early 1960s. And the Americans liberated him from Buchenwald. So for him, America was this land of this golden Demdar Hills. This is an amazing country. Mm-hmm. And so he came to Texas in the early 60s and he looked around and he saw segregation going on there. And he was thinking, this is not the America that I know. And so we actually marched with MLK and it is actually, we're recording this early. It is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend this weekend, which is kind of nice.
Yeah,
nice
very
coincidence.
Fitting.
But he would march against segregation and towards equality. And that's something that we grew up in, that came out from the horrors of the Holocaust and the hope that came out afterwards. My mother's side of the family was also exterminated in the Holocaust, but my mother and my grandparents and my great aunt survived because they immigrated to Israel in the late 1920s, so they avoided that. But they came from a different side of it. They built a country in the desert, and for them it was all about fighting for survival and growth, and it was a nice mix of modern Jewish traditions and culture and the historic Jewish traditions and culture. And because of that, and forgive me, we can cut this out. What was your question again? I went on a little bit of a tangent.
No. That is a fascinating piece of your history. The question was really just tell us a little bit about your father's time in France after World War II.
Okay.
That made a lasting impression on your family. And you've definitely touched on a lot of that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Can I just quickly add to that?
Yeah, please.
So after the war, when my father lived in France, again, he had to start from nothing because they had nothing. And so my father got his degree in engineering at a university in Paris, and he was in the cafes in the 40s and 50s and, very early 60s in Paris. And so he was in that world of art and culture and music and wine and food. And so my father was actually the cook in our home. My mother didn't cook. Okay. My father loved cooking. That was his, especially because there was a big age difference between, my sister and I and my father. I was born in 1977. My father was 54 years old. It was a very large age gap.
Right.
But he showed his love through food and family.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So
those are some really powerful lessons from both sides of your family. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
I want to switch gears a little bit now and ask
Please.
you about law school. What attracted you to Rutgers Law School specifically?
So I was working in advertising and marketing when I graduated college. That was my degree, my undergraduate degree. I went to Boston University, studied communication, art history was my minor, and worked in advertising for a couple of years. And there was an event that happened in 2001. I'm not sure if all your podcast listeners remember, but it was called 9/11. And after 9/11, businesses were afraid to spend money in marketing and advertising. So they laid off 95% of the agency I was working for. And I found myself out of a job and thinking, what do I do next?
Right.
And two things came to mind. I wanted to get an MBA and I wanted to get a JD. And the reason for that is I loved what I was doing in marketing and advertising. But what frustrated me the most was that we would work for hours and hours and days and weeks even on campaigns, and then take those campaigns to the legal department, and they would look at it and cross things out and say, nope, can't say that, can't do that. And we had to go back to the drawing board, and it would be so frustrating.
Right.
So when the change in life happened, I thought, okay, what do I want to do next? I want to stay in marketing and advertising, but what if I go to law school? What if I learn what I can do, what I can't say, the legalities of this, so when I go back into that world, I have that knowledge and power, and I can cut time off my hours because I was young and excited to shave off money for my clients, right?
Right. It's a great strategy.
So I took the LSATs, and I wanted to stay in the New York area because I'm born and raised in New York. Rutgers gave me an opportunity to not only be in the tri-state area, but go to a great school in a city that I'm going to say this in a bit of a strange way. I feared. Newark back in the early 2000s was not the safest place. Mm-hmm. And yet there was an opportunity for change and for growth. And I figured if I'm going to go to law school, I want to help the community. Let's go to a place that could use the help. And Rutgers offered a great program for IP and corporate law, and that was close enough to home, but still enough that I can make a name for myself.
Right.
And so I chose Rutgers.
That's wonderful. Well, we're so glad that you did. Absolutely thrilled that you are one of our many alumni.
Thank you.
So let me ask you more about that experience at Rutgers. What would you say is the most important thing you learned at Rutgers Law School? This
may not be the answer you want to hear, but I think the most important thing I learned is, first of all, it's camaraderie. It is self-confidence that I gained from being in law school. And I think it's critical thinking. See, for me, law school, it wasn't the calling. People have a calling to go to law school since they were kids, and that's great for them. It wasn't for me. For me, I was looking to get certain skills out of it. And to be fair, I entered law school, for me, it was the wrong time. My mother passed away a few months before I started law school.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
it's challenging.
It was. And I went to law school, and it was my first time since my mother passed away a few months earlier that suddenly I had time to myself. I had my own apartment. Mm-hmm. I was starting a new program, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have this rigid, set way of life for the next 3 years. It'll help me get through this. Well, I wasn't mentally prepared to go through that rigorous process. Law school is not easy. Mm-hmm. Law school is complicated. It's meant to be complicated, but I wasn't mentally prepared for that. And because of that, because I was dealing with mourning the death of my mother, and I suddenly had time there was suddenly a lot of quiet in my world. Not a lot of people around me. I could sit and think. And if I wasn't thinking about what I needed to think about. And to be fair, that affected my first year law school grades. Now, as we all know, first year law school grades really sets the path for you for the next 3 years, if not the next, your entire career. And I was actually going to drop out of law school after my first semester.
Wow.
And the assistant dean at the time convinced me to stay.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. That's great.
It's interesting. I think back to that moment. I think, why did I actually stay? And, I was thinking about it before the podcast, and I realized I had no plan B.
Right.
I mean,
what else were you going to do?
What else was I going to do? 9/11 happened the year earlier. No one's spending money on marketing and advertising anyway. Right. I started this, and I'm a perfectionist. When I start something, I need to finish it.
Right.
And I stayed. And so for me, the 3 years of law school was overcoming my own adversity. I had to fight back from my first semester grades that were, to this day, embarrassing. And we're talking 20 years later, I'm still embarrassed about those first semester grades. But I fought back, and I graduated with a decent GPA, not one that I wanted, but I went out and I got a job and had to fight against those who, in the New York, because I want to go back to New York, those who went to Rutgers and other great schools that had better GPAs than me. And so I had to, for the next, I want to say 10 years of my life, I had to work hard to make a name for myself, to actually prove both to myself and to others that 3 months out of my entire life doesn't reflect who I am.
Right.
That's a challenge in law school.
I tell that to students all the time.
Yeah.
Because there is a way to come back from a bad semester, and students do it all the time, right? For a lot of students, it's an adjustment to a very different way of learning and thinking, and honing those critical analysis skills. So I think for a lot of folks, it is such an adjustment, and that's not even dealing with the kinds of things that you were dealing with, the death of your mother and all of the emotional trauma from that. So I think that it's completely understandable, and I'm so glad you stuck with it. And
me too. I mean, law school gave me the confidence in my ability to overcome my own adversities and my own obstacles, and sharpen the way that I think and analyze and solve problems. And that is the greatest thing to come out of law school.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now I want to ask you a little bit about your favorite subjects in law school. Were you focused on the intersection between business and law, or were you interested in something else entirely?
No, I was focused on the intersection of business and law. My favorite, there were a number of classes that I truly loved. I loved studying IP, or intellectual property, with Professor Kettle, who I believe is still at the university.
He is still here. Yes, absolutely.
I took a federal income tax class because it fit into my schedule, and I thought it was one of the greatest classes in law school. And I was shocked by that. I didn't expect that. And it was fascinating. And by the way, I never touched it again afterwards. Never.
Right. You did not become a tax lawyer.
Nope. But the best class that I took in law school, by the way, I took entertainment law classes, and that was a fascinating class because it was not just about entertainment law. We had to draft contracts. Now, this is a practical class where we had to draft contracts and figure out, okay, what are the issues that are coming up in back then it was, music and CDs and MP3s. Like, okay, what are we thinking of, and how do we solve problems now and think about the future? But I think the best class that I took in law school was a negotiations class. There was a professor, I think it was a part-time professor named Professor Braff, who was Zach Braff's father, by the way.
Okay, that's great.
And he taught negotiations, which again was a practical class because he would break us up into groups, and we would take a side of an argument and have to, stand our ground, but also negotiate a solution. And negotiations is the key to just about everything in business these days. I may not be practicing law, but I deal with negotiations on a daily basis. I've got to deal with not just, outside clients and vendors. I've got to negotiate with my team.
Absolutely.
This is a skill that comes in handy daily. And I think that is one of the greatest classes that I took.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear it. It is one of those skills that is so transferable across so many aspects of life, sometimes in our personal lives too. The ability to negotiate well can come in handy.
And if you're married, you know that.
Yes, exactly.
Especially when you're to a lawyer, you know that.
Right. That is so true. That is so true.
Yes.
So what happened after law school for you? What was the trajectory right after law school?
Sure. So when I graduated law school, I went back to New York, took the bar, and started working for a medium-sized law firm in New York. It was actually the New York office of an Israeli law firm. And I chose that, or wanted to work there, because of my background. I'm proudly Jewish. It's always been a part of, who I was from day one. But working with the New York office of an Israeli law firm allowed me to work in a community that I knew well and that I wanted to help and support. And so I worked there for about 5 years, and was not loving the experience. And it wasn't, and for part of it at the time, I thought, hey, it's the firm. It's not me. It's got to be the firm.
Right.
And then I ended up moving to California because I wanted a break from the firm. And I went out to LA to visit my college roommate at the time and thought, hey, this is a nice place to visit.
Right.
And I had my eyes set out in California. In that path, I found an IP conference in San Francisco.
Okay.
And flew out for an IP conference, and which was a fascinating conference. But I sat next to a very cute and brilliant woman who now, I'm married to. So I jokingly say I got CLE and a wife out of that.
Well, that's money well spent.
I agree. And so I ended up, pardon me.
No worries.
So I ended up setting my sights in San Francisco. And we dated a 1.5 year long distance, New York, California. Took the bar in California because I did not want to move out to California without a bar. So suddenly now I have 3 bar exams in my pocket, which
Good
how
for
many
you.
do I use at the moment? Yeah.
Right. 0. Am I
0. Oh, just about.
Right.
I'm retired in a couple of states at the ripe old age of 40 something.
Right.
So when I passed the bar in California, I moved out here and worked for a law firm out here. And I realized very quickly, it wasn't the firm in New York. It was me. I found myself unhappy practicing law, and not because of the law itself. I think the law is a fascinating and interesting subject. When I was in high school, we studied Talmud. Talmud is Jewish law, and it's all about reading and studying the analysis of Jewish law. So you have the Jewish law out of the Tanakh or out of the Bible, and you literally read the arguments from different sides, from different rabbis through the years. So law is always something that fascinated me. The practice of law is different. Something else I learned in law school, which I'll go into in a second, is what I didn't like about practicing was dealing with other lawyers. Sorry to all my lawyers out there.
No, it's a good thing to figure out.
It is, because one of the things I learned in law school, in my first year of law school, my first semester, was you don't have to be a jerk to practice law really well. You can
Absolutely.
be tough. Exactly. Yeah, you can be tough.
You can zealously represent your client.
Yes. But you don't have to be a jerk about it.
Right.
And my first semester of law school, when I had to fly back to Israel for the 1 year anniversary of my mother's passing, and I had to miss a week of first semester, and a friend of mine, or I thought was a friend of mine, said to me, I'm not giving you my notes. That's your issue. You deal with it.
Wow.
And that's
unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is shocking to me.
But that's something that kept popping up throughout my career in law. Mm-hmm. Lawyers don't have to be jerks. But
Right.
they are. And that's not my personality. I like bringing people together. I believe that rising tides lift all ships. And so there's no reason why you have to have that attitude. Because of that, I was dealing with not just opposing counsel, but attorneys and firms that I was like, I don't want to deal with you. Why should I be spending my days and my weeks and my life dealing with people that I don't care or respect, and finding myself mirroring their behavior because that's what's expected of me. That's not who I am. And at the same time, I would spend my weekends up in California because I'm an hour away from Napa and Sonoma. I would go up to wineries in Napa and Sonoma and go tasting. But then I started volunteering in wineries.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I would spend my weeks practicing law and my Saturdays and Sundays working in wineries. And I would come back, and my then girlfriend, now wife, said to me, "You seem happier when you come back from working in wineries than you do in law. Maybe you should look into this one day." And I said, "Sure, yeah, one day."
Such a great suggestion. So you followed that path, obviously.
I followed that path. My father passed away in 2011, and I needed a break at that point from life, from law. So I quit the law, and my wife was working at the time, and she's like, "You take all the time that you need." I do voiceovers as well on the side. And so I was supporting myself through voiceover work.
Oh, that's great.
So one of the things I can do as a self-employed person is I could take a break when I want to.
Absolutely.
And one day my wife was traveling, and I went up to Napa Valley for a wine tasting, and walked in to this random winery that I read about but never tasted their wines, and started tasting their wines. But there were 2 gentlemen there working, and they were talking about marketing and small wineries. Now, Dean Bond, you could tell I'm a very shy person.
Oh, yeah. Right. Wallflower. Absolutely.
Totally. And so as the shy New Yorker, I put in my 2 cents because, I used to work in marketing and advertising. And
Right. It's right up your alley.
pouring me wine. Right. And you're pouring me wine. And the more you drink, the more you talk. So for an hour and a half, we were having a conversation about marketing and wineries. And after an hour and a half, they introduced themselves as the GM of the winery and the head of direct sales. And they said, "Do you want to work here?"
Wow.
I said, "Sure." And this is 2 weeks before my wedding. And I called my wife and I said, "I think I just got a job at a winery."
That is such a great story.
Yeah.
That's also helpful, I think, for our listeners, because I often tell students, you've got to be open to the thing that just comes along that isn't what you expected. But if it feels right, you've got to be willing to take a risk and put yourself out there. And that's exactly what you did. And it clearly worked out well for you.
Absolutely.
So
it's funny. I speak to a lot of, I teach wine education as well. So I work with a lot of folks in different parts of their career, whether they're learning wine education because they want to, because it's a passion, or some people are trying to advance their career. And I always tell them, the path is never linear. At least it's not for me. If as lawyers, or even as just humans on this earth, there's an entire world around us that influence who we are. I started out in marketing and advertising. Between the year of when I was applying to law school and when I started law school, I taught first grade Judaic studies. And then
I love that.
And then I went to law school and I practiced law for a number of years. And now I'm a winemaker and a wine educator. Right. And it seems like a zigzag, but I wouldn't be where I am today if I did not have all of these experiences. Right. I teach wine education. I taught first grade. That comes into play. I was an attorney for years. That absolutely comes into play, whether it's, negotiations or contract drafting or thinking about how to solve problems analytically in the winery or beyond the winery, marketing and advertising. Everything is sales in life. Right. And so you have to know how to market and advertise. So while this may not seem like a linear path, I'm glad I had these various experiences because it influences the way I'm thinking today. If you stick to one straight path, and you don't look at the side. I mean, Dean Bond, you had your various experiences as well. You traveled the world, and you're helping. You're helping with legal matters around the world with gender issues and sexuality. I was reading your book, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And
well, thank you.
You are where you are because you have that wide view. If you have a narrow path and you only see what's ahead of you, you're missing out not just the details, but a potential creative way of solving your legal issue or your problems in general.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you on that. And I also think you might have missed your calling, not only as winemaker and successful business person, but inspirational speaker. I mean, the way you're describing your life and your opportunities, it really does inspire me. So let me ask you a little bit more about your transition to winemaking. Mm-hmm. What did that transition feel like for you, and what do you think are some of the most important lessons you learned in those early days?
Sure. One of the it's amazing how the mind works. One of the most interesting things in wine is wine pairing with food. When I transitioned into wine, I had to pair my wines with a lot of humble pie. So I'm starting from the beginning again. Right. I went to work in a tasting room. I'm thinking, I'm a lawyer. I have this education. I have these, advanced degrees. And there I am in a tasting room pouring wines for people who are at this point a lot wealthier than I am, have more stable careers. And I'm standing there pouring wines and, standing behind a register every so often. Now, this is a high-end winery. It was a high-end hospitality experience. But I can't tell you the number of times in the 3 months that I started off in the tasting room, because I was only there for 3 months after they say they realized my potential and they moved me to oversee the direct consumer side of sales. Right. In those 3 months, I can't tell you, it's going to be more than one hand, how many times that I got the question, are your parents okay with the fact that you left the law and now work in a winery? Now, the sarcastic New Yorker in me answered in certain ways that were probably not exactly the most professional.
That's hilarious.
But you know what? You got to start somewhere. And sometimes it may seem like a step back, but it's not. If I realized, or if I decided after a week or a month working in this tasting room thinking, I don't want to do this, this is beneath me, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Right.
And that experience only lasted 3 months before I started overseeing their direct consumer sales and marketing.
Right.
And I left that winery after 3 years overseeing their entire DTC side, which is hospitality and sales and was supporting the nationwide sales team and, overseeing a team of about 8 or 9 people. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have the experience that I had in law school and beyond.
That's incredible. And I really appreciate your willingness to sort of absorb those early lessons and realize that it's a pathway to something significant. So what do you think in terms of your legal training translated into skills with the winery? You mentioned contracts and your ability to negotiate.
Sure.
Those make sense to me. Are there other things that you took from law school that you think are helpful now in your day-to-day life?
You can't take the lawyer out of the lawyer.
It's true.
Who I am. It's part of my personality.
Right.
And it's all of us. We're trained in this way. The wine industry in general, which I love, the wine community is fantastic. But you basically have 2 groups of people in the wine industry. You have farmers, those who grow the grapes, and you have those who create the wine and sell the wine. And they're 2 different types of people. Different mentalities. Farmers don't always work well with business people, or when I say work well, I mean communicate well with business people.
Sure.
And sales and marketing, salespeople often can sell anything,
right?
But the skills learned, aside from contracts, it's all about listening. It's listening to not just the needs of the farmers or listening to the needs of the salespeople, but listening to the wine itself, listening to the earth. Every year is different. We rely on nature. Everything we do is natural. So we have years that are rainier, years that are drier and more beautiful. And once we harvest the grapes, the wine will do whatever the wine wants to do in barrel. Faults can happen.
Right.
Wines can be ruined. Wines can be absolutely gorgeous. And then you have to respond to these issues. It's all about clear thinking. It's all about how do you solve problems. And
that's law school, right?
That's law school. That's 100% law school.
Yes, taking that creative problem-solving ability and applying it in an area that is totally different, but
absolutely
still relies on that basic problem-solving ability.
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's also it's problem-solving on the sales side. You say, okay, this wine is not doing well. How do we transition? What can we do to either increase our visitation or our clientele or our sales? It's all about problem solving.
Right.
And it's all about looking at the world around you. It's not that narrow path. It's that global view.
Right.
And that's law school.
That is law school. Absolutely. No, I love it. So tell me, what's your favorite and least favorite part of your job?
The best part of my job is that if I'm having a bad day, I can have a glass of wine at any hour and no one's going to say a thing to me.
Right. But you could do it out in the open. I could do the same thing, but I'd have to do it quietly.
You have to explain yourself.
Right.
For me, I'm a professional.
Right.
No, the best part of my job. Well, let me talk about the most difficult part of my job.
Okay, great.
And that is, it really is sales. I'll admit, sales come naturally to me. I am an honest person. When I go in front of a clientele or of a client, I'll pour wine. I'll tell them what I think. And I'm not going to force anybody to take a wine that does not make sense for them, or that they don't want to take. For me, it's no benefit if they buy a wine, it sits there on a shelf for years or on a wine list that no one buys it. That doesn't benefit me. That means no additional sales for me.
Right.
But sales is tough. You need to have a very thick skin, or I jokingly say the skin of Petite Sirah. It's a very thick skin grape to deal with sales. I produce wines. I pour my heart and my soul into every bottle of wine that I produce. And then I take this thing that I think is absolutely beautiful and I go in front of a buyer, and basically in my own mind, I'm thinking, please take me, please accept me. And basically I'm standing there saying, this is me. Do you want me? Do you not want me? It's like being single all over again. That was not fun.
Right. That is tough. I hear you. I think that would be very challenging.
Yeah. I want you to love me. I want you to love my wines. And they may say, nah, not for me. they're dead to me at that point. No, they and that's, I don't take it personally. Oh, that's not true. Every so often it stings. It does sting. Right. I move on quickly. But the best part of wine for me, it's not the production. Wine is an expression of nature, and it's shaped by science and history and geography and geology and even religion. In Judaism, we drink wine on every Friday night, and on every holiday we make a blessing over wine. But all of those, whether it's science, history, geography, geology, it leaves its mark on what's in the glass. It's a living record of land and time, and it's guided by generations of accumulated knowledge. I, as a winemaker, I'm proud to be. We've been drinking wines in Judaism since ancient times. I'm part of a chain that goes back thousands of years. I'm a certified sommelier under the Quartermaster Psalms, and I'm a holder of a diploma in wine and spirits. And so I'm drawn to analyze its complexities and nuances, and that's part of my critical thinking, and that starts in law school. Right. But to me, above all of that, wine's highest purpose is realized at the moment that you open the bottle and you share it with others. There is a connection and conversation and laughter and memories and the joy that comes together when you open the bottle of wine. It's not necessarily because of the bottle of wine, but it's there. Let's be honest.
That is the most beautiful description of wine I've ever heard.
Thank you.
Truly.
It's let's be honest. If I was working in accounts payable or data entry, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. No.
There's a culture of wine that invites curiosity and romance and joy, and that's what continues to bring me to draw me into this business. I've been in the wine business since 2012 or 2013. I produced my first wine in 2019. Wow. I got my grapes in September or August of 2019, and it's fermenting, and I bottle it, and I bottle it in March of 2020. Another major event happened in March of 2020. The world shut down. And I'm ready to share my wines with everybody, and I can't. So I posted online that, hey, guess what? I made wine. By the way, I produced wine as an experiment as part of my diploma studies. And so I produced 19 cases, and I put it on social media, and I said, hey, friends and family, guess what? I made wine. And they acquired all my wines overnight. By the way, I have to say, my friends stepped up.
They did.
And they did. And for me, that was exciting. And I thought, that's the best part of making wine.
Absolutely. Did they give you feedback?
They did. And that's the best part. That ended up not being the best part of making wine. About a month or 2 or 3 months later, I started getting texts and emails from people that I could not see, that I could not be with because of the pandemic. And by the way, my first wine was a skin contact Chenin Blanc. Talk about irony of producing a skin contact wine when you can't even touch skins with anybody.
Right. Oh,
and so they're opening these wines, and I'm getting messages of, oh my God, this wine is really good. Do you have any more? And I would get photos of people drinking my wine. I realized a part of me is in this moment of joy and happiness in a time when things were really dark.
So it's wine as connector between humans. That's beautiful.
That is my favorite part.
Yeah, honestly. I believe it. That's fantastic. Sagie, when you think back on your time here, what moments or mentors most shaped the way that you approach your professional life today?
Sure. So there are two professors, when I think back to law school, that always they're in the forefront for me. One is Professor Kettle, John Kettle. I loved intellectual property. I connected to it because I've always loved music and art. And so IP was an area of law that interested me. And I took every class I could with John Kettle, and he was a fantastic professor. And he may not remember who I am, but he definitely shaped who I was as an attorney, because that was my path as an attorney. And so I spent a good 7-8 years practicing laws as an IP lawyer, as well as corporate law. And it is because of Professor Kettle. The other person who I'd like to mention is Dean Rothman. Okay. So Andrew Rothman was the dean during my years in law school, and I did a clinic with him. And I was in the clinic during my last semester because I thought, hey, last semester I'll do a clinic. That's easy. And it was one of the most fascinating and interesting experiences during law school, and it helped shape who I was. when I was in law school, I interned with a federal judge, not thinking I'd ever go into that side of it, but I wanted that experience. And I took advantage of different experiences. And clinic for me was like, easy class. I loved that class because it was truly a practical class. We sat there in our clinic and people would walk through the door seeking help, people from the community. I mentioned earlier why I went to Rutgers, Newark. And that's really the moment when I was able to interact and help those in the community on a daily basis. And Dean Rothman not only was our leader, but he was a kind, smart, and truly gentle attorney, the kind of attorney that I wanted to be throughout my career. And he was able to not simply provide us guidance with the law, but personal guidance and career guidance. And his door was always open to us. And for that reason, I always think of him as one of my mentors in law school. Now, to be fair, I don't think if either of them would remember me. Maybe they do. Hopefully they do.
I bet they
helped
do.
shape, but they both helped shape who I was as an attorney and who I am today.
That's wonderful. Well, they're both still here, and
fantastic.
I'm sure both would be so happy to know the impact that they had on you when you were a student. So I'll be sure to let them know.
Always, please do. Professors, they see a lot of students every year, and they stay teaching, and they just thousands of students walk through the doors, but they don't always realize the impact that they make on students. Right. And sometimes they do need to hear that.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to hear that.
Thank you.
So let me ask you, what do you hope people think or feel while they're sipping your wine? What do you aspire to?
That's an interesting question. I don't want them thinking about me. I don't necessarily want them thinking about the wine. I want them to be in the moment.
Okay.
That is everything. The moment you start thinking about one thing specifically, you're kind of removed from that moment. Yes, there's a beauty of when you're with friends, and I've had this recently where I've been with friends and we're laughing, and someone pours a wine, and I taste this, and I say, wait, what is this? This is really good. Sure, do I want that? Yes, but it changed that vibe right at that moment.
Right.
I'd love the wines to be in the spotlight and for people to enjoy and think about what they're tasting and drinking, and they want to analyze it, go ahead. But really, it's all about, I want the moment to be joyous and happy, and it's all about togetherness. And to me, in a way, wine is my redemption story from practicing law.
I love that. Yeah.
Wasn't, where I was tearing people apart, where I was fighting with others all day and all week, and that's not me.
Right.
It's all about the togetherness.
This is much more a reflection of who you are as a person. Yeah. I can tell.
Absolutely.
So if you could go back and speak to yourself, your younger self on the first day of law school, what advice would you give to yourself in that moment?
Wait a year.
Right. Hold on.
Just this, your time. But looking back at that time, I think it was 2002, be patient. Be patient, be yourself. And you can do this. Law school, I don't know if you're going to like me saying this. Law school is not hard. Law school is a skill that you need to learn, and skills are hard when you don't know what you're doing. And in the first day of school, no one knows what they're doing.
Absolutely true.
So you need to check your ego at the door and realize when you walk in that door, you know nothing. And you're in a group of people together, and you're going to rise together, and you're going to learn this all together, help each other. You're going to become a better lawyer if you are open-minded, if you help each other out, and if you can walk out. You don't learn anything in law school. In the sense that you don't learn anything about practicing law in law school. You learn the law. Right. And you learn about how to think and critical thinking, and you learn about different areas of law, and you kind of figure out what you want to do based on the classes that you're taking. But when you walk in the door of a law firm on day one, you realize you know nothing. Or rather, you don't know nothing. You don't know how to practice.
Right.
And that's a different skill.
It is a different skill.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And patience is a virtue, and you really have to be patient throughout at least the first couple of years, the first year of law school, and the first few years of practice. be patient, give yourself time, and know you can do this. You can do this. If you're in law school, you can do it. You have to have the mindset of the focus and the attention and the desire to want to succeed. But you can do this.
That's fantastic. Like I said, great inspiration. No, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
And we've talked about the many ways in which your career has not followed the traditional path. And so I want to invite you to speak to law students or prospective law students who may already know that their career is not going to follow that linear traditional path. What would you say to those students? What would you tell them about the non-traditional path?
It's not easy, but it's a lot more fun. There's always a saying that, sure, you can do anything with a law degree. Sure, I actually believe that you can, but sometimes convincing others that, and I'm talking about whether it's another career or job interview, to convince others that you're the right candidate, even though, and it's always the even though, that you have a law degree or you practice law, is not always easy, but it's doable. And it's all about selling yourself as, I'm a unique candidate, or I have a unique background, that you're looking at hundreds of resumes or hundreds of other candidates in front of you. They all have slightly different backgrounds. I'm different. And I'm different because I have skills that allow me to help you as a business, or you as a client, or you as anything. I come in, when I started in wine, people looked at me like, sure, a lawyer who's just having fun in wine. No.
Dabbling, right.
Dabbling.
Right. Yeah.
Another rich lawyer. I was never rich, but hey. I married a French woman, and she was supposed to have a castle and a moat and chateau and great. That didn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I keep reminding her of that too.
Right.
It's all about bringing in your skills. I'm not bringing in my federal income tax class. I'm not bringing in my property law. What I'm bringing in is my ability to analyze certain issues. I can negotiate contracts. I negotiate anything with you. I can bring you an experience that you don't have already on your team. You don't have in your world, and you don't have to pay $650 or $1,000 an hour for it. But hey, I don't practice law for them. But really, it's all about, I'm bringing that experience.
Absolutely. And to go back to what we were saying earlier, you're bringing also that problem-solving ability, right?
Yes,
that cuts across a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I went to law school believing that I would finish law school and go work in house counsel and at an ad agency. And I would live, I'd have a penthouse apartment in New York with a beautiful view of the city. Right. And I find myself living in Northern California making wine. Law school was definitely a part of my journey. It wasn't an easy part of my journey. Yeah. And thinking back at times, I'm like, do I regret going? And the truth is no. Law school gave me the confidence to, as I said, to overcome my own personal adversities, to realize I can get past any difficulty in life. Losing a parent is the toughest thing, one of the toughest things that I ever experienced.
Right.
But I was able to adjust and adapt my focus, myself, and realize I can do anything. I am able to make a real difference in the lives of others, whether it was while I was practicing law. I was able to help creatives, because I was working in intellectual property, help creatives realize their visions, or advocate in and out of court for those that couldn't advocate for themselves. I also realized I can transition into a different career and use those skills, use my power for good. Use my skills in a world that, to be fair, is lacking it. The wine world does not many people with my background that actually manage or work in wineries. And so while the practice of law was not ultimately my calling, the skills that I learned and I gained in law school and beyond allowed me not just to enter the wine world, but to thrive in it. And no, I don't regret going to law school. Law school was not for me, or being a lawyer was not for me, but I have no regrets at all, because I wouldn't be where I am today without any of this.
That's
and that's an important thing to think about for most people. They don't realize that,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I say there are no mistakes in your career in life. You can quit a job after a month or after a year, but that shapes who you are, no matter what.
And you learn from that.
Yes, you do.
Each time you pivot and do something else, it's a new experience, and you learn from the prior experience. No, I believe that. Well, and it's so wonderful to talk to you and to see the journey that you've been on, and to know that Rutgers Law School played a small part in that. I'm so grateful to call you among our alumni. So thank you so much for taking the time, Sagie. I really appreciate it. And I've learned so much about the wine business today. So I appreciate that too. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
The Power of Attorney is a production of Rutgers Law School. With 2 locations just minutes from New York City and Philadelphia, Rutgers Law offers the prestige and reputation of a large, nationally known university with a personal, small campus experience. Learn more by visiting us at law.rutgers.edu.